All right, so if you want to draw figures in perspective, you have come to the right place. Today, I'm going to help you get a sense for intuitive perspective, because once I got a feel for it, I use the technique I'm going to talk about in a second to set up everything so that I could get May into the scene looking great. There is going to be a little bit of homework for you today as well at the end of the video. And I'm also thinking of doing a few more videos on this to make it a little bit of a series on perspective. So comment, subscribe, like if you would be interested in seeing more of that. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the exercise. I think this is a really fun and helpful way to start getting a feel for perspective whenever you see it. Now, this isn't going to be a super technical breakdown of how perspective works and all that stuff like you would get in an art course, right? I don't even think you'd really want that, to be honest. So in any 3D space, there are 3 axes that you need to understand. The first is the Z-axis. This is going to be your up and down. So if you jump up, you're moving in the Z-axis. Then you have your X-axis. This is going to be like moving left and right, like strafing left and right in the video game. And then this red one is going to be the Y-axis. And the Y-axis is going to be like walking forward and back. This purple line represents the horizon line, and usually you're going to see it represented by the letters HZ. And so this is going to be like when you're looking at a picture and you see that impossibly thin edge where the sky and the ground meet. Once you have an image that you want to study from, you first want to find the horizon line. The horizon line is going to be where you can't see it from above or below. You're looking at it straight on. So if we look at her, we can't see the top of her head, right? She's looking down at us, but if she were to be looking straight, we would see below her chin. So the horizon line isn't up here. But if we look down here, we can see the tops of her shoes. So the horizon line must be above here. Fortunately, we don't have to get it perfectly. We just need to get a rough estimate of where it is. I'm just going to guess that it's about right there. The Z-axis is going to be everything that's going up in a straight line. So you're going to be looking for things that are man-made usually. So that little signal light tower and then this pole right here are excellent places to mark the Z-axis. And you're going to want to do this on 2 opposite sides if you can. Sometimes you're not going to be able to find a good place, but you do the best you can, right? So for the X-axis, think about if I were to keep that green line going down, I want to think about a perpendicular cube. The X-axis will be one line, and then the Y-axis will be one that goes perpendicular to that. So I think for this image, the best example is going to be this parking line right here. And fortunately for the Y-axis, we can see a little bit here where this is going to perpendicularly intersect with that. Now we don't have to draw it all the way. We just need to make sure we mark it in the same exact direction. Now, unfortunately, if I were to do another line here somewhere, I don't really have a good idea of where it would be. If we could have seen exactly where this parking line ended on both sides, we could have just drawn that and then made it perpendicular. This would also be a reasonable example. So let's mark that, because this looks like this cart is actually facing the exact direction of this parking spot right here. So you can just zoom in, and I'm going to go ahead and say mark that as a potential Y-axis line here. Actually, upon further inspection here, I'm going to say that this horizon line is actually a bit lower. Looking at her jeans, it still feels like we're slightly below this area if I were to do a cross section of her thigh. But once we get down to around here, that feels like it's right head on there. So I'm just going to move it right down there. And I think that's quite a bit more accurate. And this is probably just the natural slope of the earth of the parking lot. I'm not going to assume that this image is rotated because the building here looks like it's pretty straight. So for the next and final part of the exercise, I'm going to export this image with these lines that we drew, but I'm going to decrease the opacity so we can see it a little bit clearer. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to hit crop. We're just going to crop this image. If you're in Procreate, then you would just want to make sure that the canvas is the exact same size as the image. Make sure there's no white spots on the edge. After I've cropped it, this is a really important step. Remember how I reduced the opacity of the actual photo? If we go all the way, it's still white in the background. We don't want that. So we're going to hide the background and we're going to see that checkered dot, which means that it's translucent. And so I'm going to come back here and we're going to bring that to a level where we can still see the main details comfortably enough. So I think about 65% would be good. We leave those lines fully opaque, but we have it like this. And so we want to save it as a PNG. And that will let us keep the transparency because we're going to need that to set up the full perspective grid. So if I open up our files here, we can see how light this image is compared to the original one. It's much more opaque and darker. This is because it's translucent. So the next step is going to be bringing this image into the program that we can use to magically set up the perspective. So the program I am talking about, you've probably heard me mention it before on this website, is PureRef. So you just head over to pureref.com and you have this reference image software that you can just drag and drop images to and use it to look at your references with. And it's available on Windows, Linux, and Mac, which is great. It's free, but you can also support them by donating once you download. I highly recommend that because they just made an awesome update that makes this whole process a lot easier. So once you've downloaded it, it's going to open up like this with a black window that's above everything else. No matter what you click on, it's going to stay on top of it. So once you have it up, all you need to do is take this image and drag it in like that. And then you're going to want to zoom out if the image is really big like that. And there you have it. It's there and you could use it as reference. You can move the whole window around by right clicking. If we bring in the original one, this one's a lot darker because the black background of PureRef is shining through this, because remember, this one we saved as a PNG, so it would be translucent. But we don't need this one, so I'm going to get rid of it. So once you have this window set up, minimize your file browser, and you're going to want to go back to the window you downloaded PureRef from. Go to rubenlaura.com/perspective grid. There'll be a link in the description and you get to this really awesome perspective grid simulator. Okay, so this is voiceover Josh from the future here, and I made a mistake. Remember when I said this layer needs to be at 65%? That was wrong. That is way too high, and you're not going to be able to see anything once we go to the next step. So I actually redid this and re-exported it at like 20%, which is much better. So save a PNG with no background. If you're in Procreate, just hide the background layer, so you're only just seeing a ghosted version of the image. The reason this is so important is because once you've gotten the hang of this, is you want to be bringing in a PNG of your drawing with perfect crisp lines and no background at all. So that is going to make this a lot easier. But when you're practicing, you could just trace the image like this while having these helpful axes lines there, but I feel like that wastes time, and depending on how your art skill is at the moment, the tracing might confuse you. So we're just going to do it this way, and I'll show you a little bit of how I did it with this image as well. To pick up where we left off, try to make sure that this image is the only thing that you see in your PureRef window, and we're going to want to pull up the browser that we have, our Ruben Laura, and I have it just like how it is when you first log into the website. I recommend leaving the aspect ratio at off, so it's about 16:9, and have PureRef sitting on top of it like this, where you can still see the other parts of the website. Like before, we're going to go to mode. Since we've selected our image, we're going to do overlay selection. We're going to hit OK. You want to lock this image so we can't move it anymore. So right click the image, go to canvas, and then lock the canvas. Then we go to mode, do transparent to mouse. And now it's going to be almost like PureRef doesn't exist. This is just an overlay over anything that we do here in our computer. So if I go to the website, it's just going to be there permanently. If I go to Unsplash, It's just going to be hovering there permanently and I can still use the website. So now that we've done that, first match the horizon line. So I'm going to click the red line here and move it down to where our horizon line is. Got it. Here is where having the transparency was so important. See how hard it is to see the Z-axis button and the X-axis button and the Y-axis button. And then there's this screenshot button here, which we're going to need at the end as well. So you want to be able to see through your image so that you can click on those. The next step is going to be, okay, for the X-axis, we want these blue lines to line up with the blue lines in our picture. So you go to the blue button and you just move them left and right until they match. This can take a while. I think I'm going to just try to find a happy medium, and I'm erring more on this bigger line because the longer it is, the more accurate it's going to be. But it could also be a little bit off depending on if you place the horizon line in the right spot. But it doesn't have to be perfect because this is already going to be a lot more accurate than anything you would try to draw freehand. So next, we're going to go to this little yellow circle right here, and we're going to line up these yellow-orange lines with the red lines. So you can see they're completely off. They're crossing almost perpendicular. So we're going to move that right, and you see how it's getting a lot closer to being parallel. What's cool about this website is even if the vanishing point is off screen, it just snaps back so that we can keep moving it this way. And this is why I like this website over using the Procreate function, because you have very limited space in Procreate. If it's too far off the axis, you're going to have a stressful time trying to set up the vanishing points perfectly. So I'm going to keep doing that. And that one's lined up. But over here, this one, it looks like it would intersect over here if we were to continue to draw the line. So I'm going to try to find a happy medium. That looks much more accurate, but now this one's a little bit off. So I'll just go in between that. Last is the Z-axis. The lines usually are going to converge and make a triangle towards the top if we're looking up at our subject. And if we're looking down on our subject from above it, the lines will converge downwards. But this is a lot harder when your horizon line is in the middle, because technically what will happen is the Z-axis lines will bend around the corner like a cat or a snake eye, right? You know how they're like vertical slits. That's what it would be like. But this website doesn't have the capability of doing 4-point perspective, which is what that really is. So we want to just pick the one that has the most detail. So most of the detail of our character is going to be above her thigh. And so we're looking up at her from that point. So we want the perspective grid to be converging towards the top. We can move the lines however we want left and right, but the real change of the vanishing point is going to be moving this one up and down, which makes sense because Z-axis is up and down, remember? If we look at the image, it's pretty much going to be straight and perfectly vertical. It's not going to be noticeably converging too much. Now, if we were in a helicopter looking down at some skyscrapers, we would notice these lines curving a lot more. But in this case, you see how many times I've pulled it up? Now it looks like it's aligned with everything. But if we look at that post right there, I should have drawn these lines longer, but that post is very off. So it still needs to be even straighter. So now that post is lined up. That street light is lined up as well. So this is a lot more accurate than it was. So I'm just going to leave those two lines in the middle like that, maybe move it up a little bit more. And you can see these verticals are very, very slightly converging. If you imagine how the rest of this scene would look, imagine a camera that took all of this. This would start to look super, super distorted and wide fish angle lens style, right? They just capture all of the stuff right here that you don't see in this photo. So technically everything is a fisheye lens image. We just crop it depending on how much we want to see. So now that we've got this grid set up here, it really perfectly shows us how the ground level is, as if this is a video game level. If you are a beginner, you might think, oh, if I wanted to keep drawing the parking grid lines, you would just keep going in the same direction. But look at this one. Now it would be pointing this way instead of that way. So then I can imagine drawing a car here or another character. So with this done, we want to take a screenshot of this image without this woman showing. The website has a cool feature for that. We just tap on the camera. And then I can grab my mouse and just right click it, and we can say save image as, or copy image and just paste it into Photoshop. This can be a little disorienting, but remember, we can't click into pure ref. So all I need to do is name it. I'll get rid of this icon. We want to click X here to help us place the image. Once we get into Photoshop again, or whatever our drawing software is, we want to take a screenshot of our entire desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This screenshot will perfectly overlay with the image that the website exports for us when we clicked this little camera button. We're going to click on Pure Ref to make it focused. That's going to let us click on the image. Then we can hit Command or Control R. Now we can move it again. Then we're going to go to Mode and undo the overlay to selection. Or we could just do Command, I believe it was Command Y. We can just click that. And now it's back to normal. Now we can save this if we want, and it will save the images in the file for us. But I'm just going to close it. Now that we're back into Photoshop, I'm going to open up our files, and I'm going to take our screenshot and drag that in, create a new file. I'm going to open up our files again and get the clean version of our screenshot and bring that in. It's saved at a really nice size, 3000 pixels wide, and we're going to leave it right there. Check. And then I'm going to take that layer and multiply it, and then I'm going to move it into place. And like I mentioned before, we won't even have to scale it. All we need to do is drag it down, and boom, we can see that it fits perfectly. We're going to go back into Finder here, or your file browser, and get the original image. Drag this back in. What we want to do now is just scale it to fit the image there perfectly. Then I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit so that we can see if it lines up with the base image. And this is a trick I do. I just kind of do that. And you see how our head isn't the right height. Move it into the right place. So now I'm going to zoom out, and then we can hide the original screenshot. Let's create a layer at the bottom and fill it with white. We have a solid background. I'm going to bring back the opacity of our reference photo like that. With the layer with our fresh grid lines, we can set it to multiply, but that's kind of hard to see. So I like to set it to divide. And then we set our background to something that isn't pure white. Let's just do a gray. There we go. Let's do a little bit of a lighter gray. Yeah, so I like divide. I like how that looks. You can use multiply, but there we have it. So I'll just reduce the opacity a little bit, and I'll do a quick little demo. This won't be too accurate, but I want to show you how once you have something like this, you've learned a lot by setting up all of the grid lines yourself. So I can imagine these lines, these parking lines like that. I can imagine the next one over here. So since we have the horizon line where it needs to be right here, I know this is where the cross section of the thigh would just be a line, but now I know we're below it. So I could draw it like this, and I can easily set up some cylinders to start to understand how the feet would actually work. Can set up a cube for her heel. And you really want to go into this granular detail so you start to understand exactly how this anatomy works in 3D space. I made her feet a little bit bigger, right? But you see how cool this is. If you wanted to continue the buildings in the background, you would start to see how if this one is at this height, it would have to go down and they would need to get smaller. Everything that's the same height would go down. You wouldn't keep drawing things getting bigger and bigger. And if it was over here, you could continue the same thing because this is the vanishing point here. So this is something that would be pretty big. You could draw the entrance of the store over here, make up a new store, and you can get an idea for how to set up really, really cool scenes that are super expansive and expressive, or just help you figure out how to get your selected view for your character looking good. As for the homework on Unsplash, because we're kind of boycotting Pinterest here a little bit, guys, but also because I don't want to get copyright claimed from Pinterest because they've been acting up. You can go to my page here on Ergo Josh, and I have liked a lot of images that are free to use that have excellent setups for perspective lines. Here's a vertical, here's the x-axis, here's the y-axis on this side. You could do the same process, set up the grid here, and practice breaking her figure down into different shapes. All of these images here have excellent perspective lines. Some are much harder than others. Like this is quite a challenging one because she's sitting on a car, she's rotated, the car is curvilinear. There's just a lot of really great images here where you have easy to see clear lines that you can use to map everything out. These are poses that make really good works of art, in my opinion, especially if you want to do your own comics or webtoons and stuff like that. Like this is a really, really cool angle. And if you could pull something like this off with your own characters, you get a lot of attention. I can vouch for it, right? You can look at my Instagram account and see how much people enjoy my perspective drawings. So have fun. Unsplash has a lot of really great quality images for you to look at. Some of these, you technically have to buy them, but you can look at them in full resolution. We don't care about this text. We don't need it. We're just breaking the image down here. Look at this mechanical leg. You could easily generate a cyborg character off of this once you get the perspective set up. So I encourage you to do this with as many images as you can. And the more you do it, you'll just get a feel for it and you'll be able to set things up yourself. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.